Well, hello everyone. Here, show you right here like a typical basic math study right here. But whenever it comes to understanding about solving math problems, and it could also be in regards to which is bigger, and of course which one is equal and which one is smaller than compared to typical numbers, right? But still that if we're talking about for 1500 right here. And we all know that 1500, 1500 is really that it's another way of how you want to call it is for 1,500 right here, right? And so let's just say that on average though that's about how much money that you will be bringing in a month, right? And on average though that maybe if it is maybe up to $3,000, but still that talk about for 1,500 right here, and for 20% right here. So a lot of times it sure seems that way that when we do think about that, we're looking at the pocketbook, and you want to know too that you're going to maybe be asking the question to where that about how much 20% will be, and so it sure seems that way that if we're talking about 20%, I'm like, well, really, if that's really about to where that how much how much that is deducted or how much that is added on to the math, the decimal. And so if we were to be doing the math right here, and just want to know too that just working the math right here, that whenever it comes to solving math problems, a lot of times, and you want to know too that you're going to go ahead and put on there for $100, but then let's just say that if you put on here for 75 cents or something like that, you will put C right there, right? And a lot of times you want to know too that would you write a math problem like that toward it that 75C, and sometimes it's like, well, really, if you write it like that, that could also maybe be a measuring about about how much is in the can or something like that. But the way I think about it too, that when we do the typical math problems, though, that why is it that this right here, this one right here, appears to be bigger than the five right here, and so in case if we're 102, that why is it that the one is bigger than the five, and like I say, for that's for $1,000, right? And then plus the 500 and on top of that, and so that right there will be 1,500, right? So the way we think about this typical math problem, and if we were to be solving this using a calculator, though, that if we were to actually talk about it, is that that if that amount right there would be instead of 0, you go and put on here, it'll be at 999. So let's just say that if we were to do the particular math problem, such as 999 .998 right there. So let's just say that if we were to kind of change that around, and I can put on here, just put a space right there. So let's just say that if any senior citizen would be able to use that amount right there, just to be able to take care of their bills or any other expenses, that why is it that their checks cannot be, in the amount of like per month, how come that the check amount cannot be for that amount right there for 999 .998 right there, and do you think that that would maybe be about the same amount compared to for the 1,500, and so it sure seems that way that, well, really, is that really bigger or smaller? But it sure seems that way that when we talk about 20% right there, that you likely want to know too that 9 seems to be a bigger number than compared to the 1, and even compared to the 5. So really, how much money is coming in? Let's just say that on average, though, about every 3 months. Let's just say on about every 3 months or so, that a lot of seniors might even say too, about every 3 months. By every So let's just say on average, though, about 3 months. Every 3 months that you'll see the amount of 999 and 99.8 right there. So let's just say that on average, though, that's the amount typical equations, and let's just say on average, though, that right there, I guess, is not the amount of dollars, but if anything, maybe if we were to actually look at that as like a decimal fraction reading, and whenever it comes to division. And to me, though, that sounds a lot like, just a little bit like, if you're trying to round numbers to the nearest tax rate. So let's just say if you came up with 77957 right there or something like that, then that's about how much money that you will be paying in taxes, right? And we're talking about that up to $17 per purchases. And let's just say that if you're buying a new set of tires or anything else that you're going to be purchasing, and that you want to know too that if you were to be doing the calculations right here, and want to know too that why is it on average though that a lot of paychecks would show the amount of if your check was maybe 640 or maybe 670 or something like that, or maybe 544 or something like that. Do you think that maybe for any reason at all that there will be no zeros included in that amount right there for the cash dollars? And so you want to know too that well, really, that some checks amount like anybody says to word it the way we look at that right there is that talking about right here of talking about with cash dollar amounts. And you want to know too that this right here seems like a bigger number, but it ain't. This right here, of course, the one right there, of course, will be the bigger number right there. And half the time you want to know too, if you want to highlight that in pink, I'm like, well, really, this amount right here, I can go ahead and put this right here for pink, just because of the fact, like everybody else would say too, have we thought about that to where we're going ahead and highlight that? Maybe if that's supposed to be, the amount written, just because of before taxes come in or something like that. Which I'm like, you would think that maybe the amount would be bigger, before taxes. But the way we think about that though is like talking about with the math though that why is it about maybe every 4 months or so before or after a birthday or something like sometime like that or an anniversary, you might see a little bit less coming to your pocketbook compared to what you usually see. And so sometimes it sure seems that way that about how much it is for the 20% right here. So let's just say that on average though that if we were to do the calculations, that does that pretty much mean that you see $100 more or $100 less to every paycheck, in spite about how many members in a household that are employed, and how many members in a household that really have earned any bonuses, or maybe gotten paid tips or salaries or anything like that. So a lot of times it sure seems that way, that every time that we do the math right here, that it seems like that that most of your bills are getting paid per month, right? But the first thing that you're going to maybe wonder is to where that how come every paycheck is not written in the amount of not even for 1998 and 93 cents or something like that. And you want to know too that why is it that most of the time that you don't see any check written in the amount for, like anybody say too, that if we would actually do the studies here, is that you put a 1 right there along the comma, so that would be that would be close to $2,000, wouldn't it? And for sure, like everybody else would say too, that that on average though, that that will be the amount of money that like everybody else would say too, that that will probably be the amount of money that you will be paid whenever it comes to your tax return or something like that. I'm like, but half the time, if we were to do the math though, that how come that you don't see too much of that? I'm talking about for 999.998 right there. But in a lot of ways, that the math digits right here will be measured by, to where if you were to take that period, I'm like, go take that off right there and move it right there, then really that you say that would not really make a lot of sense either, because for how many digits are around to the nearest fives or something like that you do the studies. So a lot of times you want to know too that by every paycheck that you think about, that how often is it going to include the number 9 on there? And a lot of times it's the word, yeah, well, zero, though. Zero basically means that, does zero basically mean that you were paid evenly on quantity on top of how much money that you were supposed to be paid, and compared to the amount of money that you're still waiting to be paid? And so a lot of times they're like, yeah, based on the money that your cash dollar earnings that you earned from nearly a month earlier. And so a lot of times it sure seems that way. If we were to do the studies about this, and you want to know too, then why is it that the one right there looks a lot bigger, but, in case of anybody that may wonder to where that, yeah, that you have right here with the one right here, but it sure seems that way that, talking about whenever it comes to dollar signs or anything like that, why is it that yeah, the one is bigger, right? But how come the 5 is not bigger? Because it's only for 500, compared to the 1,000 right there. So the way we think about that, though, you want to know too, this right here is supposed to be a bigger number right here, right? I'm like, for 1999, and you want to know too that, yeah, that right there is supposed to be a bigger rounding digit number right there. But, I do want to know too that just a little bit that each time that when we think about taxes, though, before taxes can come up, but, still, that, so a lot of ways it sure seems that way that when we think about our income a lot of times, that do we necessarily think about is toward it, yeah, 1,500 right there. But, the 5 is not, like, yeah, why is it that it starts out with a math problem right here, talking about for 1500.00 right there, and you want to know too that the 1 seems to be bigger than compared to the 5. And if we were to actually do the math right here, and you want to know too that yeah, well, really that between the bigger and the smaller numbers right there, and you want to know too that yeah, well, really that seems like an awful big number right there. And if that's the amount, if that's the calculations for what you get when we're talking about speaking up for the 20% right here. So it's like, yeah, that so it's like a lot of times when we look, if we were to actually do the math right there, that are we like everybody else would say too, that whenever you are paying your bills a lot of times, do you really see that to where that you go ahead and name the price for what you agreed to pay, and then you go ahead and negotiate from there, and then knowing about doing the typical studies about how much money you have. So yeah, so a lot of times it's like every time we do the math studies here, and you want to know too that to where that, yeah, well, for the most part that whenever you do pay your bills a lot of times, that you don't make the prices, right? You don't make the prices. So let's just say on average though, that maybe if you do agree to pay $100, from that first week, and then let's just say for the following week, and let's just say if we're talking about maybe for a typical car payment, right? But a lot of times it sure seems that way that if we were to think about the math though, that really we don't really call the prices for how expensive things are. But let's just say that maybe if we could maybe set like yeah, on the bill though, to where to do the calculations to where that you go ahead and pay the full amount, and let's just say that full amount needs to be greater than maybe the 10%. So let's just say that yeah, on average though, that if it's got to be greater than, I'm like, yeah. So let's just say that if you do pay 10% or something like that, 1 week that you pay 10%, and then or maybe the following month or so that you go ahead and pay 20%. So if we were to actually do the calculations here, the typical math studies right here, that you want to know too that do you think that maybe you should have control over the fact about how whenever things get too expensive, to where if they just if things wind up getting a little bit more expensive than what they were nearly 3 months ago, or if things wind up getting a little bit cheaper. And so it's like, really, do you think that maybe we all should have control over how our money is spent and everything? But it sure seems that way toward it. If you were to actually call out if you were to actually do the calculations at your own time, and let's just say if you will be asking a question toward it, yeah, well, really, if you're on time with the payments for the first 3 months, and then maybe that, yeah, what they call it, like, for the payment plan and all that, but, still, but a lot of times you want to know too that, you do see less sometimes and you see more sometimes. But how often are we really going to see this amount right here for 1999.98 right there? And a lot of times it sure seems that way that you would maybe see those digits, especially whenever you get your tax return. And then most of the time that's usually whenever you see something close to that. And so it's like 102 that, yeah, well, between the bigger and the smaller numbers, right? And you 102 that, yeah, well, really, that the one, of course, the one is a smaller number, but why is it that that's first in line? And I anybody say that, yeah, well, of course, it's a big number just because of the fact that this right here it's a lower digit right there. So like people say toward that, yeah, well, if you were to actually do the scale right there, the measurements, and at 102, that hey, that the one right there is in it's in the thousands column, compared to the 500, that's in the hundreds. And so it sure seems that way that if we were to actually do the math, though, that you 102, that if we want to cause as to which number is considered relevant, like, yeah, between positive and negative. And but it sure seems that way that every time we think about math, though, that are we necessarily thinking about which number is bigger or smaller, or just you would just do the studies to where that 1 month that you were paid, you received you're paid like every month that you're paid the same amount, but then you want to know too that certain times of the week that seems like that you're just a little bit short, from the amount of money that you usually have. And like I want to know too that seems like you're always going to ask that question toward why is it that it seems like that you see a little bit less than what you usually see. And but on your hand, that doing the calculations here, that they say you got the one right there, being at the bigger number, and but still, have right here for 20%, and then you have right here for $100 right here. And so yeah, that when we speak about $100, though, that it's like the way that's displayed right here is almost like to where that like at the bonus round, to where that that's like it's another way of stating to where that that's the amount from and I know that the way we do the math, though, nowadays is that if you want to go ahead and maybe put like a bracket, I'm like, yeah, like these brackets right here, 102, that how many anybody probably say too, especially on the retirement check or something like that, that you would maybe see something like that to where that this is how we calculate the math right here, that this that additional $100 is not paid to you until that after that 45 days has expired. If they can see that that you didn't make as much money from your check right there, or like that you didn't that you were not like, yeah, due to the a calculation error on your check or something like on according to the database or something like that. So a lot of times it seems like that when we do the math right here, that it's like, yeah, almost everything is going to be different than compared to trying to do the actual math counting on a multiplication table. And so you're likely say is to where that, yeah, well, really, how many times are we going to really see a paycheck that's going to be worth, for 1999.98 right there, and compared to how much that you've seen it on a typical check for 1,500, and even maybe for 1,200, or maybe for just 850, and so it sure seems that way that when we think about that, though, it's like, yeah, well, really, 9 is a number, right? But how many of us are really going to see 0 more often? And likely 102 that, is it really because of the fact that 9 is maybe not worth as much, or if that's just, mainly because of that's the reading before taxes, come and play. But, the way I think about it too, though, that if we would actually do the math, though, that do you feel at least 5 times richer whenever you do see 99 right there? And it could be 99 cents or it could be $99 right there. You can maybe ask that question to her, that do you feel richer whenever you see 99 right there, and compared to 00 right there? And so it sure seems that way. If we would actually do the math right there, and want to know just a little bit too, that this right here was supposed to be an example right here of a receipt, and you want to know too that this right here looks like I'm like, yeah, I think I said before too that it's supposed to be like an example right there of like the percentage rating, for taxes. But let's just say on average though that if we were to actually take the 1 and then the 9 right there, and let's just say make that 19, and you want to know too if that's supposed to be 1900 or if that's supposed to be just the typical calculations of the tax code. I guess you say a lot of it is the tax code. And so when we think about the tax code, that's another way of stating toward about how much money that was. Oh my God, yeah, typical studies about the tax ratings. And so it sure seems that way, that when we actually do the math though, and you want to know too, that is that a measure of dollars or nickels and dimes and pennies or anything like that? But but it sure seems that way, that if we would actually calculate this by doing a decimal fraction, no, you want to know too that this number right here seems to be bigger. And let's just say that if we're talking about the typical rounding, though, that you want to know too that why is it that 99.98 seems to be a bigger number right there? So let's just say that on average, though, if we put a period right there and 102, that yeah, but that would be for not 1,000, but still. But on average, though, that if we were to be thinking about that, doing the math, though, that how often are we really going to see our cash dollar amounts, in any amounts of like which call for 9.99 and 0.98 right there. And a lot of it has to do with the fact about, well, really that doing the math right here, that's just, do we kind of call that to where that's just, it's additional at $9 more than maybe than compared to what was what should have been paid. But still, but on average though, if we're talking about typical math studies here, is that we're talking about for 1,500 right there, 1,500 a month. But about how much money do you think that would be for every 3 months? I got 3 months right here, so let's just say on average that it would be it would be 3,500 right there. So about every 3 months, and let's just say if we were to use that, about every 3 months, that it will be 3,500. And so that's still, that's still a smaller number than compared to the 500 right there. So you want to know too that even if we were to change that, even if we were to change that to a 4, and you want to know too that that right there, is a bigger number than compared to the 1 right there. But a lot of times it seems like you go ahead and change that to a 2 or to a 4. Change that to a 4 and 102. That that right there is is that a bigger number or a smaller number? Like people say that right there looks close enough, but still, 4 is still a bigger number than compared to the 50 right there. And but still. in case anybody say that, between the bigger numbers and the smaller numbers, though, like you talk about for rounding, typical rounding. But a lot of ways I really just think about is just to try not to make it any more confusing than what it is. But anyway, but talk about the typical rounding right here. But it's like, if we do the rounding here, to do typical math right here, about how much 10% goes in and how much 20% goes in. And you likely want to know too that, well, really, that it sure seems that way, that most of us are probably looking forward to the best offers and the bigger numbers, for, to be able to increase the allowance to where that, certain digits, and like, for how much that rounds up to. And but on a typical study though, that between the bigger and the smaller numbers, a lot of times you're likely thinking too that, well, really, if I were to think about that though, that $1,500, I'm like, that seems like a lot of money. And on average though, that is that about how much money that you make a month though, or maybe every month and a half, every month and 3 weeks or something like that? And it sure seems that way. You want to know too that really, that if you had that amount of money to keep stored in your piggy bank, do you think that you would have at least 5 of them? That you could have around. About how many pennies do you think that would be worth? If I've done the calculations, I would say that would probably be about 6,000 pennies right there. Actually, it's 16,000. If I've done the calculations, how many pennies would that be worth? I'm like, pennies. Well, I'm like, I haven't done the math yet, but I would say it would be 16,000. Yeah, 16,000 pennies. About 16,000 pennies is equal to, so I'll put P right there for pennies. So if we would actually do the calculations right there, 16,000 pennies. 16,000 pennies, is that, round up to about 6, people say, well, that seems about 6,000, wouldn't it? Not 1,500? But I'm like, well, really, that, you say that, if you could maybe find that, even, maybe 8,000 pennies or something like that, but, really. But doing the math right here, that, what's the highest amount that you've been able to save up in your typical piggy bank? And I can remember it was $27 was the last time I tried. I remember it was $27. It was $27 the last time I tried it, and if I can remember right, that there's been a couple of times and I was able to save up $15, but not even close to even 100. So if we were to have an actual piggy bank, that you want to know too, that you got in that habit to where you go ahead and put a penny or a dime or a nickel inside of a piggy bank and leave it in there for a few weeks. And you want to know too that, is that the typical same thing as compared to any source of investments or anything? But like everybody say, if you're talking about retirement savings or any other source of savings, whenever it comes to insurance, though, and you want to know too that, hey, that do you see more or less, in your savings and compared to what you usually see, and what seems to be the bigger number, or what seems to be the smaller number, and the way you think about that is toward you just don't think about that until you actually do the studies about that. So it's like 102 that do you think that maybe that this dime or this nickel could be worth a lot more, in the near future, but still. But on the other hand, that if we would actually do the math studies right here, that between a 1 and the 5 right there, and you want to know too that, but 1 though, like you want to know too that, really, how does that be considered a bigger number than compared to the 5? Well, because it's in the thousand. I'm like, it's like you got right here is the hundreds, and you got right here is the thousands right here. But anyway, and then you got the pennies right here. You got the cents symbol right there. But Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.